Wonderful. Welcome, everybody. Hope you all can hear and see us okay. Do drop a note in the chat if you're having any difficulties, or in the Q&A. Jenny, is that is the chat open to all of our participants? Yeah. So anyways, just let us know if you're having difficulty seeing anything, but we'll make a start. Welcome to our session today, which is covering RTSG, that is Research Training Support Grants, overseas institutional visits, and overseas field work applications within SENSS. My name is Mark Johnson. I'm the South and East Network of Social Sciences Deputy Director. And Anna, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. So my name is Anna Canhoto, and I'm the Deputy Director for the Southeast. So to make you make things complicated for you. So this will be the DTP one, the first one, and Mark is leading Deputy Director for the more recent one that's now taking students.
Thanks so much, Anna. Jenny, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Jenny Wilders and I'm the Training and Development Manager primarily for DTP2, but also working with DTP1 students.
Thanks so much, Jenny. Felicity, I'm sure most people will know you, but you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Everyone, I manage both DTPs and I'm going to be lurking in the background just in case questions come up that I can help with.
Great. Thanks so much, Felicity. And Manjeri's just put in the Q&A that the chat is disabled for them. So it may be that people can just use the Q&A for anything that you want to raise there. We can keep that open so we can keep track of things that arise. And of course, as we go through, don't hesitate to put things in the Q&A, and we can try and pick up on anything. We'll also have an opportunity at the end. There's a number of different sections to the webinar today. Jenny's going to kick off by talking about RTSG and the processes involved in that. Then I'm going to come in and talk about the overseas fieldwork and overseas institutional visits. We'll have a Q&A, opportunities for you to raise questions after that initial set of presentations, because what we're presenting is for both DTP1 and DTP2 students. There are some differences, particularly in terms of RTSG, that Jenny will pick up on, but there's broad similarities across the two DTPs. Then we're going to invite, after we've gone through those portions of it, we'll invite Doctoral Training Partnership 2 students, that those of you that are new to the South and East Network of Social Sciences, we'll invite you to leave at that point, because then Anna is going to be addressing in particular those of you in DTP1 students in terms of placements, because there's significant differences between DTP1 and DTP2 placements processes and expectations. Just to note, for those of you who are in SENSS DTP2, Jenny and I will be running a separate session for you on placements in January, and you'll receive invitation for that if you haven't done so already. So that's just to give you a sense of what we'll be doing this afternoon. So I'm going to stop now and hand it straight over to you, Jenny. Oh, and the other thing to say is we are recording this so it can be available for those who weren't able to join us today. Over to you, Jenny, to talk about RTSG.
Thanks, Mark. Okay, so hopefully you can all see the slides good enough. So the first thing, as Mark said, we're going to talk about is Research Training Support Grant. So as Mark alluded to, there's some slight differentiations between the two DTPs in terms of application process. But broadly speaking, RTSG are funds that are supposed to support you in successfully completing your research project. And the fund is available to all students regardless of what stage you are in your PhD, so including if any of you are doing a master's year. It's a pooled fund of funding, so it's not a personal allowance specific to each student, but a kind of group pooled funding source. The Depending on which DTP you're a member of, you can either apply for £700 per year if you're a DTP1 student, or £1,000 per year for DTP2 students. And then there's a maximum allowance of up to £3,500 for DTP1 students and £3,000 for DTP2 student. So the
Sorry,
last.
Jenny, I'm not seeing the slides changing.
Oh, sorry.
Thanks, Sina. Just seen your note as well. There we go. I think it's.
Are they big? Are they big enough, or are they in the wrong view?
It's still in the small thing. I'm wondering
Oh, okay.
if we can put them in the.
Just click on slideshow, because it's not in slideshow, it's in.
That.
There we go. Is
Yeah,
that?
is that good?
I think you need to share. Do you have two screens maybe?
Yeah.
Because you're showing us the wrong. Yeah, so go to the top, swap presenter view and slideshow, I think. Perfect.
There we go.
Is that right now?
Perfect.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, great.
Sorry about that.
Thanks, Jenny. We got
Thank
there.
you. Got there in the end. Okay, so yeah, so those are the different allowances for each DTP2, each DTPs. If you don't apply for and aren't awarded your maximum amount in a year, you can apply for more in the following year, but this is at kind of SENSS discretion. And RTSG is designed to cover things such as training, so courses, participant payments that you may need to make for any of your studies, UK fieldwork, any travel for research purposes, including purchase of an annual rail card, any language training costs, conference fees, etc., that kind of thing. And one thing that's very important to stress is that to be able to access your RTSG funding, you have to complete your annual DNA to apply for this funding. And if the DNA is not completed, then you won't be able to draw on any funds and shouldn't be spending any. So there's a few things that RTSG doesn't cover. So that's things like laptops and other similar equipment. These are things that we would expect that your university should provide, as well as any standard equipment, or it's something that you should have in order to complete your PhD yourself. If you are given permission to purchase any equipment and it costs more than £200, you must return it to SENSS at the end of your studentship. Anything like stationery and books and journals that are available throughout your university's library system, etc. And then this is where there's a difference between two DTPs. So there's a slightly different application process between the two cohorts. So if you're a SENSS DTP1 student, so that's you if you started your PhD prior to October 2024, your first step would be to complete an application form, which you can find on the VLE. And on that form, you need to set out what you plan to spend your money on, how much, and you need to complete that at least 2 weeks before you need to send it. You then need to speak to your supervisor and receive a supporting statement from them, which would then go on the application form. And then you need to send your application form to your administrative lead for their approval. So the details of every institution's administrative lead is on the VLE as well. So you'll be able to find that there if you're not sure who your person is. If the amount is under £750 a year, then that can be approved locally at your institution. But if you've applied for more than £750 or more than £3,500 across your whole studentship, then that needs to come to the core team SENSS to approve that. Very, very important, if Felicity will want me to exaggerate, is that you aren't allowed to spend any money before your application has been approved. Anything that gets spent, if it's unapproved, won't be reimbursed or refunded to you. And you also have to provide any receipts or all receipts for any funds that are spent to your administrative lead. And then centrally in SENSS, we'll keep a record of any funds that are spent, but we also advise you to keep your own records so you can keep a track and an eye on how much you're spending. So then for the new SENSS DTP2 students, so that's those of you that started this year in October, it's a slightly different application process in terms of that your application will come direct to me in the SENSS core team. So again, there's an application form that's on the VLE. and you need to complete that again, setting out what you plan to spend your money on, how much, etc., at least 2 weeks before the cost is incurred. Again, you need to get your supervisor to support your application, and then all of those applications will come direct to me for approval. You'll then get the outcome of your application within about 5 working days. And again, do not spend any money before your application has been approved. In that email, you'll be given guidance of who you then need to contact at your home institution to receive the refund and reimbursement. And receipts should be provided to that person at your home institution. And again, that would usually be your operational lead for DTP2. And details of all those contacts is on the VLE as well, if you're not sure. And again, similar to the first one, we'd advise you to keep your own records, but we will also keep a record of any funds spent, so you can keep an eye on what you're spending, etc. Okay, that's that bit.
Jenny, just before I get on to the OIV, there was a question in the Q&A from Reed Allen asked, do you have to fill out an RTSG application in order to get your rail card reimbursed? And just saying they've renewed their rail card for the year, but they're not getting a reply from the administrative lead currently.
So yes, we would say that application form has to be completed for that expense as well. And you can always drop us a line in the core team if you're not getting any response locally in terms of reimbursement.
Thanks, Jenny. So just to be clear, they need to complete the RTSG form for the
RTSG
rail
for rail cards. Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Thanks very much. Okay, we'll move on then to the OIV. So OIV, or Overseas Institutional Visits, and what are these? Well, they're working visits for up to 3 months to a higher education institution or an organization with a substantial research office or research kind of work and role there. They're normally made for visits to universities, but again, they can, in exceptional circumstances, be made to appropriate research organizations. I mean, just to give you a kind of concrete example of that. So in the Philippines, I would often work in collaboration with colleagues at the University of the Philippines, but separate from that university is a Scalabrini Migration Center, and they have a research office there, and that would then qualify as a kind of an appropriate place that you might want to apply to go spend some time and do work in in consultation with folk there, consult their sources or things like that. So that's the kind of thing that we're thinking about. But it's primarily, you need to think about research institutions. This is very unlike, say doing a placement and a civil society organization or things like that. It's really about putting you into a network and having opportunities to engage with fellow researchers internationally. So it's really to encourage and support international engagement and international scholarly engagement in particular, providing you opportunity to establish research networks, develop your cohort building skills and contacts, to disseminate research findings amongst fellow colleagues, to participate in seminars and other academic activities that are relevant to your research in those places, or to undertake specialist research training that is not available within the UK. Okay, next slide, please, Jenny. So what does it include, and are you eligible? So if you're awarded an OIV, you will receive an extension to your studentship of up to 3 months and up to a maximum of £4,000 towards reasonable travel and subsistence costs. It could be used to pay for up to 3 separate visits to the same host during the course of your studentship. And ordinarily, the OIV funds can only be spent on flights, on your visa, accommodation, or things that are necessary to enable you to travel and spend time in that institution. Just a note on the OIV, the term itself, I mean, it seems very colonial to me, the notion of an overseas institutional visit. These are the language that the ESRC uses. We prefer to think about it. These are, international visits that you're making to to folk in higher education institutes elsewhere, across the world. Just to go back then, so when you are applying for this, we would expect you also to look for other sources of funding. We are limited in the funding that we have available. That's why you have to apply for this. It is not a kind of automatic entitlement. And we have a limited amount of resource in terms of being able to fund these institutional visits. We would strongly encourage you to be looking internally within your own institution. There might be other funding sources that you could access, and of course outside of your institution through other possible research organizations or things like this that might have funding available to support your trip. Speak to your supervisors, because they may be able to help you think about other sources of funding that might be available to you. If the amount that you can apply for through the OIV is not enough, we might encourage you also to think about using some of your RTSG funds to help meet overseas institutional visit cost. Just for the sake of clarity, if you are still in your master's year, you're not permitted to undertake an overseas institutional visit during that year, but you can apply while you're in the process of that year to undertake it during your, once you've moved to the PhD stage of your research. If you're undertaking if you're planning to undertake this in the final year, you should complete it at least 3 months before your funding end date. Let's just ensure that you everything is done and dusted, and you are well prepared for submission of your PhD, and everything is in hand for that. And then finally, you can only be awarded a single OIV during the course of your studentship. Although again, as a reminder, it may be that what you're planning to do is to have a number of smaller trips as part of that. Okay, so the application process, the opportunities for overseas institutional visits will be advertised through an open call twice a year. Again, it's a competitive process, so your application will be reviewed alongside of others. The next one will be launched in January 2025, so do look out for that call. You need to complete the application form. It's available on the VLE. Within your respective student handbooks, you'll find a link under funding opportunities, as well as the guidelines for that. Your supervisor and the OIV host, importantly, will need to provide supporting statements for your application. And you would normally be informed in writing of the decision within 14 days after your submission. If it's approved and it's confirmed, really important that you also follow your university's risk assessment policies and procedures, including, checking with them about the forms of insurance that they have available to you. And I would expect that most of the institutions that you're in do provide insurance, travel insurance for you, so that's not a cost and you have to bear for that. But it's important to kind of check all of these things well in advance and see what other kinds of things are required on that side of things. I see that Felicity is picking up a number of questions, so I will not attend to those. And Anna, okay, we'll bring you in. Do you want to come in, Anna? You wanted to answer this question live. Why don't you come in now? The question is, does the 4K funding from the OIV account only for the PhD researcher or the supervisor?
It's just a student.
Yeah. Thanks, Anna. Yeah. Unfortunately, as a supervisor, I wish it would cover me to travel and visit with other folk with my students as well. But it is just the students. Okay, moving on now to a related but distinct funding. That is the Overseas Fieldwork, or OFW, which I love the acronym because as somebody who's done a lot of research in the Philippines, an OFW is also referred to as an overseas foreign worker, commonly in the Philippines. So it makes it kind of fun. Anyways, Overseas Fieldwork. OFW funding is available to doctoral researchers who are conducting fieldwork outside of the UK and where that is an essential component of the successful delivery of your PhD project. Crucially, you would normally have applied for OFW funding in your original studentship application, and that is generally taken as a precondition for applying for overseas fieldwork funding. There may be exceptional cases where something has significantly changed in terms of your program of research. You could, drop us a note and we could talk about that together. But normally you will need to have set out the importance of the overseas fieldwork in your original application in terms of your overall doctoral research plan for that. OFW funding is available to cover costs such as travel, again, visa applications and accommodation, things that you need in order to enable you to travel. Under certain circumstances, if you're undertaking difficult language training, you may also apply for this funding to support you if the language training you're proposing has to be taken in another country to enable that. Again, the difficult language training is something that you would have indicated in your original application. To note that there is a cap of £8,000 on the amount you can apply for. And again, we'll come on to this in a minute, via a well thought out and reasonable budget of what your expenses would be. SENSS and SENS, normally we would save for a period of 12 months. It is possible to have up to 18 months of overseas fieldwork, but 12 months should be seen as the standard, and 18 months exceptionally. There could be very good reasons why you need an extended period of time, but it would normally be for a maximum of 12 months for that. Right, let's go into the application process. So you need to ensure that you've applied for funding at least 2 calendar months before you intend to travel. I would encourage you not to leave it to just 2 months. I would encourage you to start and put the application in well before that, because there may be things that we need to go back and forth with you to kind of confirm, to double check, and things like this. Securing visas can sometimes take a very long time. In my own view, I would say you should be thinking about this 3, 4, 5 months well in advance of preparing that, maybe even longer. Don't leave it to the last minute, and then expect a quick response, and then if things arise, you don't have contingency in there. Enough said on that. Apply early. You need to provide a well thought out and reasonable budget, and it should ordinarily come within that budget of the OFF funding limit. Just a note on this: we expect you for the overseas field work that you will be using your normal stipend to pay for your everyday living expenses. Okay, so the OFW funding is for those kind of exceptional expenses that you need to travel internationally, and where the kind of, if you're having to sustain accommodation in another place as well as at home for whatever reason, we can look at that. But the point is that you're also expected to use your stipend for those everyday living costs when you're doing overseas field work. Again, once you've done your section, you need to email it to your supervisor for the supporting statement. Discuss it with your supervisor in advance of putting your application in. Once then that's all complete, you'll then send it to your respective administrative and operational leads for them to review and look at. Once they are happy with that, then they may confer with your supervisor, they may confer with others about what you're putting forward. Once they're confirmed, then that will then go on to the SENS manager for consideration. And our SENS manager will normally review this. If it's pretty straightforward, it can be approved right away. If needed, then we might confer within the SENS team about different aspects of that. And again, we'll look to make decisions about this within 2 weeks of receipt, but just to go back to the original point, make sure you leave a goodly amount of time for this. Next slide, please, Jenny. Okay, so just some final application tips, and Anna and Jenny do come in for sure if there are things you want to emphasize as well here. And so the first thing is that for all applications, make sure that you include quotes of any expenses and provide evidence. You know, there may be a particular reason why you have chosen a particular route, and but give us information about it. Say, okay, I've got this. I'm proposing to use this airline for these reasons, and there may be good reasons. It may be a little bit more, or it may be that you've selected accommodation. But give us, provide that kind of evidence of why you have chosen the one that you have. Read the rules on what's an allowable expense. Again, the different, as I said before, with overseas field work, the expectation around using your stipend to cover everyday living costs and things like that. If you are putting in for additional, it may be because you're doing field work in a place that is super expensive, and that you need additional support. You need to describe that. Tell us why that is, right? And ensure that you're kind of responding to what we've asked for here. Again, both for the OIV and the field work, explain what you're going to do and why. Don't be too ambitious, and don't be vague either. Try and be as concrete as possible. We know that you can't specify everything in advance, but for example, if you're applying for an OIV, we'd like more than simply saying, I'm making a visit to the University of Philippines, and I'm going to meet people there. And tell us who are these people? Why is it important to go there? What is it you're proposing to do? Why is it going to be vital to the kind of research and networking that you're proposing to do? For OIVs, importantly, you must have a letter of support with your application. We need to know that you've been in touch with these people, that they are happy to receive you, to be in conversation, to offer input into what you're planning to do. And for overseas fieldwork applications, likewise, it is always best practice to have an appropriate institutional affiliation and support in the country that you're proposing to undertake fieldwork. Indeed, it can often be a requirement for securing a research visa. So again, if that's appropriate, provide us a letter documenting that within your application. As we've said, you should look to apply for funds elsewhere to cover additional expenses, and this could apply equally both to the OIV and OFW, and other funding sources that you have approached. For example, if you're proposing to do anthropological fieldwork, you may want to apply additionally to the Emsley Horniman Fund through the Royal Anthropological Institute, which offers funding for people doing research projects. Or there may be institutional funds that you can have access to. If you are not successful initially in the overseas institutional visit competition, you will receive feedback and you can apply again after incorporating that feedback. So for that one, if you're, have another crack at it, if there's time remaining within your PhD. And just to pick up on the question in the call, there will be, I think we said there's 2, is that right, Jenny? Overseas institutional visits call. So one in January. When will the next one likely to be, January?
I believe it's September.
Okay. So late summer, early autumn. Be looking out for that next call. Yeah. Appropriate to the question in the chat, make sure you've discussed your application with your supervisors and acquainted with the requirements of your home institution. So a question about the routine procedure to start planning an overseas institution visit. Is there any platform where you can see available opportunities, or are there any tips from successful cases by previous SENSS scholars? Do we have examples of previous OIVs? I mean, we could look at that, posting, I don't know that we have, at the minute.
Mark, we do.
Well, we do.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's on the website because we've got the new website, and so I need to check with Aaron whether he's moved those across. But we do have a plan to put examples of things like OIVs, fieldwork, difficult
Great.
training placements, reports from students who have done those and how they set about doing them will be put on the website, but also on the VLE. And we'll alert people when that's been done. But maybe we can find an example of an excellent application for each of these and ask the students concerned if they're prepared to allow us to share that.
It's a great idea. Good, good. And look, if you want, if you want to, speak about these things with your supervisors, if you're struggling to think about, you have an idea, a rough idea of what you'd like to do, but not sure what would be the most appropriate institution, drop us a note in SENSS, and we can also have a conversation with you. But always the first point of call is with your supervisors, who will likely have really good ideas about appropriate folk that you might approach. But do reach out if you're struggling to think about people to be in touch with and appropriate institutions. Manjiri has a question about the OIV form dated for September 2024 in the VLE. Yes, that is the one you use for this January's call. If it's on the VLE now, it is the one that's the one that we will be inviting you to use for the application that opens in January. Any other questions? Or Anna, is there anything you wanted to come in?
If I may add to that question about
Please.
organizing an overseas visit. Yes, absolutely start with your supervisor, but remember, because this is supposed to be linked to your PhD, other good approaches would be, for instance, if there is someone you cite who's very important for your work, it would make perfect sense for you to organize a visit to where this person works. So that would be a very good justification. So someone got applied for one where there is a new methodology, and the use of technique that is very relevant. So kind of how the discipline is going, and they would like to spend some time there to learn about this new technology of augmented reality and so on. That made perfect sense. Alternatively, for instance, if you'd like to go and work in a different country, apply to university in Belgium. So this could be a great time to look at what they're doing there and try to organize a visit. So think about what your current study or where you want to go or who is important for you to know. And that's how I would start by organizing or overseas visit. There is no platform that I'm aware of because really this is about how it links to your PhD.
Thanks so much, Anna. Saloni is asking about how many OIVs are typically awarded per cycle. We have an indication of that.
Yep. So in the DTP one, we have 8 through the year. So we aim for 4. We awarded 4 in one cycle, 4 in the second. If we were to not award all 4 in one, that would go to the next one. But we had 4 per cycle, roughly. That's the plan so far.
Thanks, Anna. And that's probably relatively the same numbers that we'll be looking at, I think, for DTP2 as well. Jenny, you're nodding your head. Is that right? Or Felicity, do come in if I'm misspeaking here.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, Felicity.
I think that's our ambition is to
Okay.
have the same number.
Great. Any other questions related to RTSG, OIV, or OFW? I think we've picked up all the ones that were put in the Q&A. Just give you a couple of minutes to have a think. Well, if not, it's just, maybe to leave you again with the, Rhea, and thank you for that point. Fantastic point. Saying that you can also contact the student committee to ask any questions. Thank you so much for that. And of course, also thank you to the student committee for reaching out and asking for this, as you had done also for the DNA session that Anna ran earlier this term. Great point. Rely on your peers. Have conversations with them. I think the overall message is plan ahead, read carefully the guidelines, have those conversations, think about, how things fit within your overall plan of your research. If you get stuck, drop us a line, and we can have a conversation with you. Well, if there are no more questions in terms of RTSG or OIV or OFW, we are going to invite those of you who are DTP2 students, that is to say you've started just this year in October, we're going to invite you to leave now, not because we're not happy to have you here, but simply we don't want any confusion arising, because Anna is now going to take over and present information about placements for our DTP1 students. And because the process and expectations around that are quite different, we thought it's important to differentiate those. So if you're a DTP2 student, now is the chance you get a few minutes back of your afternoon. And if you're a DTP1 student, do hang on. And I'm going to turn over straight now to Anna for that.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. So in DTP1, or the Southeast Network for Social Sciences, placements are optional, right? Which means that if you'd like funding to do one, you will need to apply specifically for that. Usually, we assume that this is meant to support placements in the UK only. This has to do with the terms of the funding. If it's really important for you, for your career, for your studies to do a placement elsewhere, then you do need to email Felicity before applying. We will support you if we can, but most likely we cannot. And that will have to be done through an OIV, for instance. So this is for placements in UK usually. And to clarify that, when we're talking about placements, you can still do internships if you want. For instance, you can spend a couple of weeks here, a month there. Well, when we're talking about funding for placements, but we're talking specifically about funding activities related to the placement and extending your deadline. So if you decide to do an internship or a placement without applying for this studentship here, you can still do it. It's just that your deadline is not going to be expected. So to clarify that, you can still do it. It's just not the funded bit. So Jenny, so when we talk about placements in this context, what we mean? We're talking about doing a placement of up to 3 months that will result in an extension to your studentship. This is the main point of applying, right? So you're going to work, for instance, in a museum, not work, yes, do a placement in a museum or a school, or I don't know, policy, European Parliament, and you want to have an extension, corresponding extension in your deadline, in your studentship. So this will cover the funding for the additional 3 months. And in addition to that, you can apply for some reasonable expenses. So typically these may be travel expenses. So for instance, imagine that you're based in Kent and you're going to do a placement in the Parliament in London. You're going to need train tickets to go, right? So this will typically be travel expenses. It might be additional maintenance if in excess of what would be normal in your studentship. It's only if it's significantly more expensive. Otherwise, we wouldn't normally pay it. It could be, for instance, that you may need insurance. Imagine you're going to work with children, or you need insurance or do some sort of health check, or you're going to work with animals and you need to have some vaccine. I don't know. If you need to do something like that, that is not covered by university, then you could apply for that here. It's very important to realize that this does not cover field work. Placements are not meant to be for field work. That is part of RTSG funding. So we will not cover any field work expenses like vouchers or participant incentives. We will not cover expenses with third parties. So if you're going for a meal with a colleague in placement or with family or something, you can pay for your meal, but you cannot cover for the third person. And we also will not cover any expenses incurred before the placement was approved. So if you started your placement already, or you had to do some training in order to do the placement, and that will happen before you applied for this and approved, we will not refund you on that. So be careful with that. Also to note that you may apply for some money and we give you, even if it's approved, it may end up giving you less. For instance, if you're applying for meals with third parties or things that we feel it's not reasonable. So Sina is asking about accommodation costs if the placement is further away. So it would be covered if it's in excess of what would be the studentship, right? So if you're already paying for accommodation where you are, we would pay the excess, for instance, right? Or if you don't need accommodation where you are, but you would need in the new place, then yes, we could cover. It would have to be a reasonable expense. You would need to submit quotes, show that you found the reasonable cost, a reasonably costly priced accommodation. So it would be in excess of what is already covered in your studentship. Okay, Sina, so I've answered that question. Next slide, please, Jenny. So sometimes it may say, well, the funding is not enough. For instance, if accommodation costs more than what is covered in the studentship, you may try to apply for, you may consider using RTSG funds to meet the additional costs, for instance, with travel or something like that. And of course, as with all other aspects of this, of the SENSS funding, you are encouraged to look for additional funds elsewhere. So in fact, in the form, you will be asked to indicate specifically what other sources of funding you are exploring to complement the additional costs you're going to incur. So who can apply for placement funding? This is actually very similar to the OIVs. You can only do a placement while you are in your PhD, which means that if you are a master student, you can apply, but only if the placement is going to start after the master's is completed. So imagine you're going to complete your master's in this summer, but you know that you want to do a placement next January, you could apply now for that placement. If you are in the final year of your studentship, then you need to ensure the placement, you can only apply if the placement will have been completed at least 3 months before the end of your award, right? And the award only starts after you finish. So if you finish the placement, your placement, if you finish in September, your placement will need to have finished by the end of June at the latest. Otherwise, you cannot apply, or you can only get 1 month or something like that. You can only be awarded placement funding once. So if you've done placement and you got funding, you will not get another extension, you'll not get additional funding, but you can apply multiple times as with the OIV. So you can apply, you can cut it, can act on the feedback and apply again. So how does the application work? So we will issue an open call. It used to be twice a year, but so as with the OIV, we used to have 8 overall, 4 twice a year, but now we're spreading it out. So we'll have 4 applications so every 3 months, February, May, August, and November. And then if you don't award the placement in February, it will carry over to May, August, and so on. The form is available on the VLE, and make sure that you submit the complete form and all letters of support. You will need a letter of support from your supervisor, you need a letter of support from your university, and you'll need a letter of support from the host organization. So, and that takes time, unfortunately, so make sure you start. If you are meaning to apply in February, you should really be starting now or already making solid progress there. And as with the OIV, we aim to give you feedback within 2 weeks. It's not always possible, but we will aim to do that. And then finally, how do we assess your application? Well, really, there are here hygiene factors, right? You need to make sure that all sessions have been completed. Yes, you can do both a placement and an OIV. You can get funding for both. So this has been answered. Make sure that you provide all information missing, and you require all letters. We have applications where it looks great. Say, well, I've talked with them, but I haven't received the letter yet. They said they would send me. Well, unfortunately, it needs to be completed. I can't consider it if it's not completed. And make sure that you meet the eligibility criteria, namely the one regarding the end date, for instance. Then in terms, so this will be kind of the hygiene factors. You need to have completed every section, provided all the proof, all the evidence, all the quotes that you've been asked, make sure you attached all letters and so on. And then from after this, once this is cleared, we really want to see a clear link of how the placement is helping you, how the placement is adding value to your studies or to your career plans, right? So if you're doing, imagine that if you're doing a placement in a school, how does doing a placement in a school is going to help your PhD about sociology or psychology? Unless it's related to schools and there is no clear link, we cannot give you support for that. So do spend it. It may be frustrating, but do spend some time explaining how this fits with your overall plan. It's not just about having some experience; it's how this experience links to your project, how these links to your career plans. So how is this integrated? Because we want to see that it comes at the right time, for instance. You're going to learn some skills, develop some contacts that will help you in the rest of your PhD. For instance, you're going to learn, imagine that you want to do some collection. You can go to work with a charity to understand some issues that will then, for instance, help you later develop on your data collection instruments. That would be really helpful to do that. And you want to show also a detailed work plan. You cannot be so vague as to say, I'm going to spend 3 months there. Well, what are you going to do in these 3 months? I'm going to do training on these. I'm going to go to this site, and I'm going to learn this skill which links with this thing that I identified with my DNA, and it's going to help me develop my future plans. And this actually reminds me, you can only get funding for this if you have completed your DNA. So make sure you've completed DNA now. All those 19 that are still missing, make sure you complete it, because we cannot give you funding if you haven't not completed. And your placement should link to what you said, to a development need that you identified in your DNA. And then your costs need to be reasonable and they need to be justified. Include quotes. It may seem like it's a waste of money, but we need to understand why you are asking for this money for a train ticket or something like that. Okay, I hope that I think that's my last slide. So any questions? It follows basically the same principles, although OIV, except that it's for a different purpose, because it's about doing a placement in UK rather than go and visit an institution and develop networks elsewhere. Any questions? I see that some of these questions have been answered in the meantime.
Somebody with their, Eleanor has her hand raised.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah,
I was just wondering if you have any tips on reaching out to organizations and kind of expressing interest and like getting them to take you on.
Yes, so we do share some opportunities on the VLE when we are aware of them, so that would be one. Typically, but if it's more exploratory, so Eleanor, I'm guessing you mean more of an exploratory kind of, so there are institutions that offer placements. I would start there. Then if it's more exploratory, I think you want to show them what they gain from having you there, because some of these, some charities or so on, they may think about, oh, I'm so busy, or they may think that they have to give you some form of training or something, and it may seem like really hassle. Right. So you want, if you are approaching, you say you want what with a charity or a local government, it will be about showing, I would be really interested to do placement, and this is what I think you would, how I could help you. They are, yeah, exactly. And you may have a deliverable, you may have something about giving them feedback. Sometimes people in the charity or the organization, they will also, in order to be promoted, for instance, it helps them to see that they've done some mentoring, so that could help the person as well get at the institution being promoted. So yeah, either go through the formal way, institutions that have placements, or if it's more exploratory, make sure you take some time to understand how they would benefit from having you there, and then make that explicit when you approach them.
Great, thank you.
I would also try to explore them on LinkedIn if there is a contact between your institution and that organization. Right? Go on, imagine you want to work for Oxfam, go on LinkedIn, see if you have any contacts in Oxfam directly or indirectly. take advantage of your network to try and create these contacts rather than just a cold email.
Great,
The only other
thanks.
thing I would add to that is just to kind of watch this space. We're going to be co-organizing with the Cambridge Doctoral Training Partnership an event later in the summer, a provisional date of Wednesday, the 18th of June, and we'll be inviting both folk from within SENSS DTP1 and in Cambridge DTP1 to come and talk about their experiences of doing placements, and to share with people about how they made approaches and things like that. So do look out for that. If this is something you're thinking about, not necessarily this year, but for a future year, there'll be some opportunities for you to hear from other people and get some input into your thinking and development. Any more questions for Anna or other things that you wanted to pick up from earlier? And maybe a reminder again of the point that Rhea had made earlier about reaching out to the student committee too. Always a fantastic resource. Anna, anything from you finally?
No, I was going to mention exactly the student committee as well. There'll be a lot of experience there. So yeah, I would say that as well.
Jenny or Felicity, anything that you wanted to come in and add before we?
Nope, I'm fine.
I was only just going to add, I'll just scroll back. We've got a slide about contact details. So just to remind people of how to contact the kind of central SENSS core team if they've got any issues. And Felicity actually runs a weekly Zoom drop-in session as well on a Wednesday. So if you've got anything that you'd rather speak about in person rather than emailing, then you can come along to that as well.
Great. Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Jenny, for setting this up. And thank you, Anna and Felicity. And thank you, everyone that's come along to be with us this afternoon. Look forward to hearing and seeing your applications coming in. But take care, everybody. Hope you have a wonderful break. And if we don't see you before, Happy New Year to you all.